We've covered all of the 7 documents that they gave us in the DBQ. Just a reminder of what the prompt was asking us, though. What are we being asked to do in this essay? We're supposed to answer, how much did the Portuguese change trade in the Indian Ocean? So our historical thinking skill is continuity and change. So our entire essay can't just be on change. You should throw in a continuity, maybe 2 continuities. And so these are the body paragraphs that I wrote out if I were doing this essay. Number 1, my first body paragraph would be economic change, because I have a lot of documents. That's my strongest argument, is that there was a lot of economic change. The entire essay is about trade. So that would be a pretty strong first body paragraph. And you want your first body paragraph to be your strongest body paragraph. Your last body paragraph is probably going to be your weakest one, because you're running out of time and you're stressed and you're trying to get all the facts down. So I have a ton of documents and evidence to support this body paragraph. Then I have like 3 or so documents for the political change body paragraph. So that'll be my second one. And then lastly, I have 1 document, I think it was document 5, that fell under social and cultural continuity, because I was talking about the caste system and the fact that they were still Muslim and Hindu. You don't see a bunch of Catholic converts in South Asia. So I've established what my body paragraphs are going to be. Economic change first, then political change, then social and cultural continuity. So I have addressed both parts of my historical thinking skill, yes. But the main skill is going to be on change. Then for context, what happened prior to this time frame that I could talk about in my intro paragraph. I could talk about the Portuguese Prince Henry the Navigator funding a school of navigation and funding the expeditions of Bartholomew Diaz and Vasco da Gama to try to get to the spice trade in India. Why were they going around Africa in the first place? Because the Ottoman Empire controlled the Silk Road. Why were they interested in exploring? Because the Renaissance was occurring. They wanted to build an empire. They wanted to have a golden age. There was a thirst for knowledge. Note how that context is more than just a vague reference to, oh, before the 16th century, the Renaissance was a thing. That's not going to earn you the context points. You have to be specific and tie it to your thesis. So just as a reminder of what that prompt was asking us and how we might answer it. So now we're going to look at an example by an actual student back in 2019 in response to this essay prompt. So y'all will notice that they wrote 4 pages, 1 of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, and 4 of 4. Also, up here at the top, you have a chart that says mandatory 1, circle 1, 2, or 3, or 4. This refers to your DBQ. You do not get an option of which DBQ you answer. There is only 1. However, for your LEQ, you get 3 questions and you pick 1 to write about. So for LEQ, you have 3, you only write 1. For DBQ, you have no choice. You have to write it. So we are going to go through each of these pages, each of these paragraphs, the intro, the body paragraphs, and the conclusion, to look for the points on the rubric that correlate with each of these paragraphs. So we know that the intro paragraph is worth 2 points. You can earn the context point, which is background information, and you can earn the thesis point. And remember, we have a little formula for the thesis. You want to do the time frame, the historical thinking skill, which in this case is continuity and change over time, and you want to have body paragraph categories. So let's read this together and see if this author got those points. I'm assuming that their thesis is going to be down here, okay? Because we tell you in learning how to write an essay that your context should come before your thesis. I haven't read it yet, so I don't know. So let's find out. In the 16th century, rising technological innovations. Now, innovation is inherently a change. To innovate means to make something new. So right off the bat, they're talking about continuity and change. Rising technological innovations led to, well, what historical thinking skill is indicated there? Led to. Good, causation. So increased technology led to what? An increase in trade and exploration. They're broadly giving an idea of what's going on during this time period, which is literally the age of exploration. European countries struggled to rise in power and sought new trade routes to increase both their empirical power, and by this they just mean empire, not empirical as in science-based, so a little bit of a grammar issue there. Their empire's power, as well as improve their economy. As many Europeans did not have the proper geography to grow cash crops themselves, namely sugar and spices, so here we have SFI, sugar is a cash crop, and then also the desire for spices, they sought to acquire them for cheaper by removing the middleman in the Middle East and create their own direct trading line, setting the stage for what's going on. The Portuguese first found a way to achieve spices by traveling along the coast of Africa, around the Cape of Good Horn, and arriving at their trading posts. So more SFI. So this right here is our context. Note how they gave more than a single sentence. You cannot do context in a single phrase or a reference. They gave us multiple background scenarios. There was rising technology. Thus, there was an increase in trade and exploration. The European countries were struggling to rise to power. They're coming out of that dark age, remember, and they want to be an empire to increase their empirical power and improve their economy. They don't have the proper geography to grow the cash crops that could gain them wealth. And so what do? They find a route around the Middle East to avoid the Ottomans. So did they give us our context? Yes, they did, setting up the stage for your essay. Now we need to move into the thesis, which is 1 or 2 sentences. Their thesis says, despite the personal loyalty between established merchants and empires making them deal unequally with Portuguese traders, the Portuguese greatly transformed. Y'all may remember that it asked in the prompt, to what extent did the Portuguese change trade? You have to give a quantifier. Did they change it a lot? Did they change it a little? And they did exactly that. They said it greatly transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean. Well, how? You can't just say, yes, they changed it. You have to explain how they changed it. And that is your body paragraph categories. So number 1, how did they do it? By removing trade from the traditional Muslim merchants. So I know that this is going to be body paragraph number 1. Documents and evidence showing the Portuguese removing trade or taking over trade from the Muslims. Number 2, and by imparting trade regulations and restrictions on other empires. That's going to be body paragraph number 2. But they also put in a caveat. Despite established merchants and empires dealing unequally with Portuguese traders. So that could be a bit of a continuity. That could be another body paragraph. How did the native people in India resist the rise of the Portuguese Empire? So they gave us a time frame, 16th century. They addressed the prompt with the historical thinking skill as well as quantifying how much they changed. And they gave us body paragraph categories. So how many points does this essay have so far? 2. Good. How many points are there total on the LAMP rubric? 8. So they got 2 out of 8 so far with just 1 paragraph. The response earned 1 point for thesis and claim because it identifies 2 different categories of transformation brought about by the Portuguese. Number 1, removing trade from the traditional Muslim merchants. And number 2, imparting trade regulations and restrictions. This is preceded by a statement that acknowledges obstacles and ongoing resistance to Portuguese domination. The response also earned 1 point for context because it discusses geographic, economic, and political factors that led to European interest in overseas exploration and the spice trade. Further historical context is provided later in the body paragraphs. So now the first body paragraph. Now what we're looking for here are the SFI points. So outside SFI. And remember, how many points do you get for outside SFI? 1 point. Good, Sumin. How many pieces of outside SFI do you need to give in the whole essay? Good, just 1. So do I need to check this box for every body paragraph? I do not. I just need to find 1 example, 1 piece of outside SFI that's not in any of the documents that we went over in our last video. Also, you can get 2 content points by doing 4 documents. Now, is it likely they're going to do summaries of 4 documents in 1 paragraph? No. So we need to keep track of which documents they use and whether they do content or whether they do HIP. Now, for HIP, you get 1 point by doing 2 documents. So we're going to have to keep track of which documents they use and what they do with those documents. So let's read the first body paragraph. The Portuguese removed the Muslim merchants from the trading equation and thus increased their own impact. That is our topic sentence. Notice how it hasn't used any documents yet. You don't just go bam straight into using documents as evidence. First, you have to set the stage. What is this paragraph going to be about? It's going to be about the Portuguese taking the monopoly from the Muslim merchants. Muslim merchants had traditionally, that's the past, they had traditionally held the power in the Indian Ocean, as shown by Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca. Now, was that mentioned in any of the documents? No, it was not. So that means it is outside SFI, Mansa Musa, and his Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca. But you can't just name drop a random fact. You have to actually use it to answer your prompt. So if he's saying traditionally Muslims held power in this area, how is he using Mansa Musa to back up that claim? The Islamic faith had been greatly influential in Africa. So he's using it to show how influential the Muslims were in this area. Merchants and kings sharing the same religion had established a feeling of brotherhood and allowed for easier business transactions. So did they give outside SFI? Yes. Was it relevant, and did they use it to answer their prompt? Yes, they did. So far in this paragraph, they have earned another point. So we take the original 2 intro points and we add 1 outside SFI point. So now we're at 3 out of 8 points. And you've only written 1 paragraph in a couple of sentences. Okay, easy peasy. The Islamic faith had spread to various countries and indeed led Muslim merchants to be very loyal to the Hindu ruler of Calicut. Look at this word led. In addition to doing continuity and change, if you do another historical thinking skill throughout the essay, like causation, that can get you what point? What point can you get from addressing multiple historical thinking skills? The complexity point. Good, Andy. Now, you'll notice that I've crossed out the quotations here. That's because you're really not supposed to quote a document. They can still get the points even if they quote, but your entire essay should not just be riddled with quotations. Most readers won't even read anything that you quote, so you're supposed to paraphrase. But clearly, they are using document 1. So for content, they summarized Doc 1. Have they earned a point yet? No, they've got to do 2 more. Their summary is that the Islamic faith had spread to various countries and led Muslim merchants to be very loyal to the Hindu ruler of Calicut. Hence, in document 1, them writing advice to the Hindu ruler of Calicut. This particular advice given to the Calicut ruler is influenced by the growing power of the Portuguese and demonstrates the fear Muslim merchants had that their power and influence was waning. So here they have done HIP. What aspect of HIP did they do with document 1? Remember that H is context, I is intended audience, P is purpose, and the last P is point of view. Point of view. You could say that the Muslim merchants feared Portuguese power and influence. So that could be your historical thinking skill. Because of their religion and their occupation, remember corn peg, they are wary of the rising Portuguese Empire and the Portuguese changes that are being wrought during this time period. Or you could qualify it as H for historical context. So either one works there. So how many points have they gotten? Still haven't gotten the hit point, still haven't gotten the content point because they need to do at least 3. By replacing Muslim merchants who were rich and lived well, document 2, content statement, the Portuguese were able to step into the vacuum of merchants. However, when Barbosa, the author, claims that there are very few of the Muslim merchants remaining today, he is influenced by his desire to keep his job as a government official and probably felt obligated to tell what his ruler wanted to hear. So we're in document 2, they're talking about the author. So what H, I, P, or P do you think is being used document 2? point of view. He wants to keep his job, and he's writing very flattering things about Portugal to his boss. So you could do his point of view as a government official, or the intended audience being the ruler of Portugal. He wants to be on his good side. So we've done document 1 content, document 2 content, and document 1 hip and document 2 hip. Still at 0 points. Let's keep reading. Additionally, the Portuguese were aware that the alliance between the Turks and the local Muslims made the Turks better informed and better organized than the Portuguese. They used document 3. Aha! Now they've earned a point, a content point, but just 1 because they've only used 3 documents. If they want to get 2, they have to do 4 documents. So we can add this to the score. 3 plus 1 equals 4 out of 8. So you've already earned half of the points in the rubric with 2 paragraphs, an intro and 1 body. Let's see if they hip it. Thus, removing Muslim merchants from trading power was essential in improving Portuguese trade. They're using this to back up their thesis, all right, their topic sentence of, hey, the Portuguese removed Muslim merchants from trade, but that is not a hip statement. By accomplishing their goal, the Portuguese increased the change they caused on the Indian Ocean trading network by removing its traditional trading power. So very clearly that is change over time. Used to be Muslims in charge, now it's the Portuguese in charge. So we have gotten 4 out of 8 points. In the intro, they did context and thesis. And in this first body paragraph on change due to the removal of Muslim merchants, they've got 1 content point from using documents 1, 2, and 3, and they're building towards the hip point, but they haven't earned the hip point quite yet. So if we're going to put this into a category of political, economic, or cultural and social, which one would y'all put this under? Okay, I got some people saying political. Most of y'all are saying political. So yes, you could do political because they are interfering with the economy of these empires. But if you do economic, that's also valid. Cultural and social, probably not. Have to be one of these 2 categories. The second body paragraph, keep in mind that we are left off with 4 points. They've already used documents 1, 2, and 3, and they have hipped 2 of those documents. That means we can add on that hip point. Furthermore, the Portuguese greatly changed the maritime trade in the Indian Ocean by creating new roles for empires who wanted to trade by means of the ocean. So this is their topic sentence. Notice how they haven't used any documents yet. They are simply setting the stage for what this body paragraph is going to be about. It is going to be about them changing trade by creating new roles. Continuing in their removal of Muslim merchants, the Portuguese king was warned to not create a peace treaty with the Ottoman Empire. That was document 3. So I'm going to put doc 3 right here. Okay, because remember, you have to cite it. The 2 years it took the Portuguese to complete a trade run would be seen as unnecessary if the Ottomans could trade within India, as they would require less than half of what the Portuguese went through. Thus, by preventing existing trade agreements, Ottoman and Muslims, to continue, the Portuguese set themselves up to build a monopoly on products and become the most important players in the spice trade. So they're still using document 3, the content of document 3, like they did in body paragraph 1, but by using a different angle. Not just removing Muslim merchants from the playing field, but also breaking the connections between the Muslim merchants and the Ottoman Empire. Additionally, the Portuguese created an embargo. An embargo is when you prevent trade, so banning people from trading. The Portuguese created an embargo where they would claim any goods passing through quote-unquote their waters unless the ship in question had bought a pass. That was from document 4, if I remember correctly. So make sure that you cite that there. So early on in the second body paragraph, they continued explaining the content for document 3, but now we have another document in play, document 4. So they summarized document 4 by saying, They are creating embargoes on trade by forcing people to buy safe passage certificates. The Portuguese would take possession of as many ships as they can and sunk others with cannon fire, capturing and enslaving Muslims on board. That's the summary statement. So they have done 4 documents with content. That means we can add on that point. Considering that Salah al-Qahar wanted to create an alliance with the Ottoman Sultan, okay, so now we're looking at the author and what he wanted to do in that document. So which hip skill do you think that is addressing? This leader wanted an alliance with the Ottoman Sultan. Could be point of view or purpose. What was the purpose of this document? Building an alliance. So you could put P or POV. So now we're looking at 5 out of 8. What are the points that we've got so far? Context, thesis, outside SFI, 2 content, and 1 hip point. We have 6 out of 8 points. It is possible that his description of the Portuguese treatment towards Muslims is exaggerated, so they're addressing bias, as al-Qahar's rhetoric implies the Ottomans should feel as he does. However, not all ships were subjected to this harsh treatment described by al-Qahar. Al-Sajir claims that the toll once paid allowed Calicut to resume trade with Gujarat. So they're using document 5 for content. Remember, you need 4 to get that second content point. This implies that the Portuguese kept their word and allowed those empires with passes to pass. And they indeed would, as Al-Sajir says, the Portuguese unjustly acquired vast wealth from the toll they created. Sajir might feel that the wealth was acquired unjustly because that wealth came at the expense of Calicut's merchants. So they're talking about the author here. So we're looking at point of view for document 5. So they've done a bonus hip skill. Do they get bonus points? No, they do not. But let's say that their hip skill for document 2 was too weak to count. Then they would have a backup with document 5. The Portuguese changed the trading system in the Indian Ocean by causing trade to become limited even as it expanded. They managed to have other empires at their mercy. As demonstrated by the elaborate box made in India for the Portuguese, document 7, Portuguese power grew and impacted Indian Ocean trade in such a way that empires felt they must obey the nation. So now we officially have 6 documents that they've summarized. 3 paragraphs, an intro and 2 bodies, and we've gotten 6 out of the 8 available points on the rubric. What are the last 2 points that they have to earn? And keep in mind, this is the LAMP rubric I'm talking about with 8 points. Grammar and complexity. Good. These are the 2 that they have left to earn. But remember, the grammar point isn't a point on the rubric for the AP exam. That's just for LAMP. And so far, I've seen some issues with their grammar. Number 1, the quotations. Number 2, not capitalizing proper nouns. There's a few words or some spelling errors there. Again, not capitalizing proper nouns. So let's see what the College Board said about this essay so far. The response earned 2 points for using evidence from the documents because the contents of all 7 documents are both described accurately and also used explicitly in support of the argument. Now, we have only seen 6 of those so far, but spoiler alert, there's another body paragraph, so that's where the last one's coming in. For example, the use of documents 1, 2, and 3 to show Portuguese displacement of Muslim commercial rivals in India is followed by the statement, thus removing Muslim merchants from trading power was essential in improving Portuguese trade. The response also earned 1 point for using evidence beyond the documents because it includes several details not mentioned in the documents, sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca, that are relevant, not just random, to the essay's argument in response to the prompt. The response earned 1 point for document sourcing, that's HIP, because it accurately explains how the author's point of view, purpose, intended audience, and or the historical situation or context in which the document was produced are relevant to the contents of documents 1, 2, 4, and 5. So they did 4 HIP statements. They only need 2 to get the point. For document 1, the response offers analysis of the historical situation. For document 2, analysis of both the historical context and the point of view and purpose. For document 4, they analyzed document's purpose. And for document 5, they analyzed point of view. Now for body paragraph 3. We only have 2 points left for them to get, the grammar point and the complexity point. But let's see if they add any more outside SFI or if they add any more documents. Despite the many changes the Portuguese impacted on the Indian Ocean trade, one continuity. Well, look at that. They are doing both parts of the historical thinking skill. What point are they trying to get there? The complexity point. They are trying to get the complexity point by covering both continuity and change and a little bit of causation. One continuity that remained was the loyalty between merchants and the empires. Despite using brokers to conduct trade for them, the Portuguese received inferior products as merchants rebelled in the only way they could, quietly. Y'all remember in that last document, document 6, they said that their pepper is green and full of filth, so they're rebelling against the Portuguese control of their spice trade. Returning with the worst produce for the Portuguese, the Cochin traders took advantage of the Portuguese in the way that the Portuguese had over other empires. So now they finally used that last document. Did they have to use all 7 of the documents? No, but they did. And they used it to work towards the complexity point of not just change, but also continuity. This demonstrates a small way that the Portuguese were unable to transform the maritime trade as they were unable to control loyalty. In this manner, despite the traditional Muslim merchants having been displaced by Portuguese traders, the Hindu merchants in India, who traditionally handled all transactions at the port, continued to do so. Nevertheless, the Portuguese greatly transformed the maritime trade in the Indian Ocean, albeit not completely changed. So that is complexity. Did they use documents? Yes, they gave content for document 6. Didn't really use HIP, but they did use it to answer their thesis of what stayed the same. So we can add that complexity point. So that's a 7 out of 8, and then add that grammar point for an 8 out of 8, 99 out of 99. So let's see what the College Board said about that paragraph. The response earned 1 point for demonstrating a complex understanding because it uses multiple documents, all 7 of them, to provide a strongly corroborated argument for each of the categories of analysis that is attempted, but also demonstrates a recognition of historical complexity and nuance, acknowledging both changes that occurred as a result of the arrival of the Portuguese, but also continuities with previous periods. Furthermore, the response demonstrates an ability to recognize and analyze the agency of multiple historical actors, pointing out that local intermediaries often modified or limited the Portuguese merchants' freedom of action. Document 6 is used insightfully to that effect on pages 3 to 4. So 8 out of 8 points on that rubric, but you could get half of those points, 4 out of 8, with just 2 paragraphs. An intro, which has 2 points, and a body, which you could get 2 points if you use outside evidence and if you do content of 3 documents, which is 1. Okay, so not as big, bad, and scary as it might seem at first. All right, so we're going to review again the do's and the don'ts for writing in history. Remember, you should never use present tense. I'm sure you saw some present tense in that essay from the College Board, but remember, the College Board doesn't count grammar. For my class, you need to use only past tense. So since the authors of these documents are super dead, they are definitely from the past. So instead of saying Christopher Columbus says that the Native Americans are blah, 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 say that Christopher Columbus believed, past tense, that they were blah, blah, blah. Never quote. You need to paraphrase. This is because students often use quotes as a crutch. They don't know what they're talking about, so they figure if they just take some sentences out of the document and throw them into their essay, that would be good enough for a content point. But no, you can't just randomly throw in stuff from the document. You have to use it to tie back to your thesis. How does document 1 go along with your category of political change? How does document 2 go along with your idea of social and cultural continuity? Explain it to the reader. Never use etc. Doesn't mean anything. Never use first or second person. You only need to use third person. Make sure that you define the nouns that you're using. Don't just say they, say the Portuguese or the Muslim merchants, so I can be clear on who you're talking about. Never use contractions or shortcuts, and stay within your time period. If you're writing about period 2, then you shouldn't be talking about World War I, because that's period 4. That's way too out of your wheelhouse. The most important thing you need to keep in mind for keeping the grammar point is you need to write in coherent, grammatically correct sentences, subject-verb agreement, and definitely no fragments, incomplete sentences, or dependent clauses just hanging out there in your essay. So if I see you're missing a verb, that is not a sentence, that's an automatic loss of the grammar point, because you should be able to write coherently. Stay away from superlatives, okay, because those are opinions, and away from words like every and all, like all Muslim merchants were eliminated from the trade, because that's not going to be true. There's always going to be an exception. Don't deal in counterfactuals. Don't say things like, if Christopher Columbus had never sailed west, then things might be different today. You can't possibly know that because you don't have a time machine. You can only deal with the facts that you have. Don't wonder what would have happened if Christopher Columbus had gone east or north or south instead of west. Make sure that your SFI is exactly that, specific and factual. So note how in the essay, the author didn't just drop Mansa Musa in there and say, oh yeah, Africa was Islamic. They actually gave examples of the influence of Islam in that area, and thus why it was surprising that the Portuguese, who are not Islamic, were able to displace the Muslim merchants. So it's more so than just dropping vocabulary words, it's explaining what you're trying to say. Pay attention to the action verb. Like in the prompt, it said transformed. How did the Portuguese transform maritime trade in the Indian Ocean? That indicates the historical thinking skill of continuity and change over time. So pay attention to those words. Then with the format, you need intro, body paragraphs, and conclusions. You need at least 2 body paragraphs, but the example that we just saw had 3, which is perfectly fine. And it didn't really have a conclusion, which is perfectly fine because they must have ran out of time. Remember that your conclusion paragraph is worth the same points as your intro paragraph. If you use evidence in your intro, like if you were talking about the asiento or the encomienda, you can't double dip and put that later in your body paragraphs. The context point in your intro is separate from your outside SFI point. You cannot double dip. So if you mention the Reconquista in your intro paragraph, don't keep mentioning it throughout your essay because it's not going to earn you both of those points. You have to have separate SFI. And your thesis must be in the intro or the conclusion. Do not put it in your body paragraph. And so what I would recommend is use ACE from your SAQ in each of your body paragraphs. If your claim is the Portuguese displaced Muslim merchants, and that was a change, make that claim as your topic sentence, and then cite using SFI and documents, and then explain the historical significance of that. That gets you towards your SFI, your content points, your hit points, and your complexity points. All right, so here's a look at the LAMP rubric, and I've gone ahead and written out what the letter grades are. Now, on the exam that you're going to have, I'm going to have you identify the historical thinking skill for 1 point. That 1 point is going to be added to the 99 that are available for the actual essay. So this is going to be an assignment that is worth 100 major grade points. Y'all should aim for at least a 4 out of 8. You can do that just like we saw in the example essay with an intro paragraph and 1 body paragraph. So even if time is your enemy, you should be able to do context, thesis, 1 piece of outside evidence that's not in any of the docs, and then using 3 of those docs for content. So notice the range of scores that you can get. If you get an 8 out of 8, that's a 99. Add the 1 if you identify the historical thinking skill correctly, and that's 100. So that's an A. A 7 out of 8 is an A 93. A 6 out of 8 is an 88. That's a B. A 5 is an 82. A 4, which should be your goal, 4 or above, is a 75, a solid C. After you get past the 4, that's when you start moving into D and F territory, with a 3 being a 68, so almost a C, a 2 being a 56, and then a 1 being a 48. So what is this 0 out of 8? What does that refer to? Well, if you write an essay, but you do it completely wrong, you're still going to make higher than a 0 out of 100. I'm not going to put a 0 out of 99 or a 0 out of 100 if you don't get any points. You get at bare minimum a 40 out of 100 if you attempt the essay. Now what this means is you have to submit an essay. You can't submit a blank sheet of paper and say, where's my 40 out of 100? That's not how it works. You can't write a long essay about why Donald Duck doesn't wear pants, but when he gets out of the shower, he wraps a towel around his waist, okay? Or why they give you hot dog packs in packs of 10, but they only give you hot dog buns in packs of 8. This isn't just a turn in whatever piece of paper you want to get that bare minimum. You have to write about the question given to you. If the question given to you is about the Columbian Exchange or the Age of Exploration, then that should be what your attempt is focused on. So you have to at least try to write the essay. And you have to write it yourself. If you plagiarize, you will get a 0. And I don't mean a 40 out of 100 0. I mean a 0 out of 100 0. So you have to attempt the essay, and you have to make sure it's your work, not anybody else's, not from the internet, and then you'll get at least a bare minimum of a 40 out of 100 points. 41 out of 100 if you correctly identify whether it's causation, continuity and change, or comparison that you're answering. So here are the points that I think you should be able to get. Thesis and context. Y'all have already written an essay. You've written an LEQ. These are the exact same points as the LEQ. So you're familiar with the intro. I think you should be able to give one piece of outside evidence, something that's not in the documents at all, and explain how it would relate to your answer. How many pieces of outside evidence do you need in the entire essay? Just one. Y'all know one thing that's not going to be given to you in those documents, I guarantee it. And then you should be able to use the content of 3 documents, not HIP, but content. And then, of course, grammar. Y'all should, by this age, be able to write in complete, grammatically correct sentences. So really, you should be making a 5 out of 8. But let's just say, since it's your first DBQ, let's aim for the 4 out of 8. But the grammar point, y'all should be familiar with how to write in historical essays. So this is the rubric that I'm going to be using as I grade you. Let's zoom in. And so this is how I'm going to keep track of what points you get or don't get. So if you address all parts of the essay prompt, that's towards your thesis point. Do you frame the answer with a defensible claim? That means, are you just repeating the question, saying, yes, there were a lot of changes? Or are you actually answering the question by saying what types of changes or continuities? You want me to mark both of these because that means you get your thesis point. Then with your context point in your intro, I'm going to ask myself, is this context relevant? If your essay is on the Age of Exploration, but your context is all about, let's say, the Gupta Empire in India, then that's not relevant. That's just random facts. Okay, so you want me to check off this part. Do they have a chronological approach? You don't really need a chronological approach in order to get this point, but this is, to me, interpreting it as, did they answer context from before, during, or after? Okay, remember that you're probably going to want to focus on before and during, because after is much more difficult. Okay, so thesis and context point, that's 2 out of the 8. If you don't get the point, then I'll put an X over here. So thesis is argumentative, but it's too simple, or it lacks specificity. So if you're too vague and you're saying, oh, there was a lot of changes or there were a lot of continuities, but you don't explain how, then I will check this to give you feedback, to tell you why you didn't get the point. The thesis contains awkward organization, or it is off topic, or it is wrong. So like if you say that the Columbian exchange was mostly positive for the New World, that is not an argument you can make. It's factually incorrect. Okay, so I would put an X there. You do not want check marks over here. You want them over here. Then for document usage, I'm going to see which documents you use. If you use document 1, content, I go through and circle as I'm reading. Document 3, content, document 5, document 7, and let's say that those are all the documents that you use. Well, I'm going to count content 1, 2, 3, 4. How many points do you get for using the content of 4 documents?
2.
Exactly right. If you use 3, you get just 1. If you want all 2 of the content points, then you have to use 4 documents. So this is how I'm keeping track through your essay of which documents you used and how to properly allocate you points. Then for HIP, I go through and I circle which one I think you did. Let's say H for 1, I for 2, P for 3. You only need to do
2.
Let's say you do 4 just to have a backup. That's still only 1 point. So you have 2 content, 1 HIP. So when you get your feedback on this essay, you're going to see exactly which documents I gave you credit for content and HIP. Now let's say you attempted to do content for number 5, but you completely misinterpreted the document. Like it was Bartholomew de las Casas and you wrote about how he hated the Native Americans. You're not going to have this circled because you used it incorrectly. You have to use it correctly in order to get the points. Then for outside evidence, is it in the documents? You want it to not be in the documents, so you get the point. Is it described and used to support your thesis? That's how you get the point. Now, if you don't describe, then you don't get the point. So just dropping outside SFI is not going to be enough. So that's where I would put over here on this outside evidence is the same as the documents or other categories, or it lacks explanation, so you just name dropped it in there, or it's irrelevant to the argument. Like it's a fact that has nothing to do with the essay you're writing. If I check this, you don't get the point. So you want this, not this. Then for document analysis, that's HIP. Do you use the documents to support your claim? Or do you just drop them in? Or do they counter your thesis? So that's where this would go for improvement. For context from your intro, attempts at context are underdeveloped, meaning vague. They lack explanation. They're hastily phrased, or you didn't do context at all, okay, indicating why you did or didn't get that point. And then here, do your grammar errors detract from the argument, or are they minimal? If I check this, then you don't get the grammar point. I also have additional feedback at the bottom, like for grammar point, let's say you use present tense, I would put that. If I can't read your handwriting, I would put that. If you didn't cite your documents, oh my gosh, you best believe I'm going to be writing all over your essay because you're making me go back to the documents and figure out which one you used. If you don't really look like you know what you're talking about, then I would put study more. If you only write 1 paragraph for your whole essay, then I would put budget your time because maybe you spent the entire hour reading the documents and not writing your essay. That's going to be the feedback that you get back from me. Now, are you going to get feedback on your essay from the College Board? No, you are not. You are simply going to get a score. It's going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're not going to tell you what you made on the DBQ. They're not going to tell you what you made on the LEQ or if you did really well on the multiple choice or really poorly on the SAQ. They are simply going to give you a score, and that's it. Someone in the chat said, do we also cite the document after we HIP it? It doesn't hurt. Even if after you HIP the document, you want to tell me which skill you're using, like if you just put a little parentheses and you put P, that way I don't have to guess, are they doing intended audience or are they trying to do historical context? Now, if you label it intended audience, but it's actually historical context, I'm still going to give you the point. I'm not going to be like, oh, they labeled it wrong, so they don't get it. Like if you think you're doing point of view, but you're actually doing historical context, I'll still give you the point for it, okay? But you would help me out if you put which HIP skill you're doing and also like which document you're doing. So you could do like P document 3 or H document 4. There's no harm in that. but you do have to cite your documents for content. Whenever you use a document, please tell me which document you're using for the love of all that is holy. Don't just start talking about a document and then not cite it at all, because then I have to go back and cite it in order to make sure that I'm circling the right part on your rubric. All right, then unless y'all have any other questions, we are done with our lecture on DBQs. So what I want y'all to do next is go into the DBQ materials and go to the Writing a DBQ packet. This is a PDF document that contains an example DBQ on the Columbian Exchange. It gives you context information about the Columbian Exchange, it gives you a prompt, and then it gives you 9 documents. Okay, now on a regular DBQ, you're only going to get 7 documents, but this is for practice. So what I want y'all to do is go through and write a practice DBQ. First, read the question, figure out what the historical thinking skill is, then go through each document, summarize the document, and then answer these student analysis questions about what the document is about. So some of these questions are going to be HIP skills. Some of them are simply going to be content summaries. Remember that you don't have to HIP every single document. And when you HIP a document, you could do H for every single one that you do. You don't ever have to do point of view. It just depends on which document works best for your argument. But I particularly want you to pay attention to document 8, because one document out of the DBQ is always going to be an image, a painting, a chart, or a graph. And that's the one that students tend to have the most difficulty with. So if you're nervous about the DBQ test, here's an entire packet giving you worksheets for you to work through that information. In addition, if you want to review the content from our lectures regarding old imperialism, there is a study guide in this folder right here, Old Imperialism Content Check Study Guide. I think it has like 16 to 19 open-ended questions, so not multiple choice, but for you to answer in complete sentences. You need to be able to answer these questions. What was Christopher Columbus sailing for? He was trying to sail to India. Why was he trying to sail to India? Who is credited with discovering the New World? Who was first used as slave labor in the Americas? And then which demographic replaced them as slave labor? Why were they replaced? What factors led to that? So make sure that you're going through and answering these questions to prepare for your essay.